About a week ago, one of the craziest goals was scored in the most controversial fashion. In the first period of a Sabres Maple Leafs game, Mitch Marner retrieved the puck, passing it to Mark Giordano, and what transpired was chaos. As Marner passed it back on a breakaway, Alex Tuch crashed into the net, causing it to completely fly off. But Giordano still managed to get a shot off, and upon video review, it seemed as if the puck crossed the line while the net was off. Normally, if the net gets knocked off, then the play stops. But for something like this, that actually isn't the case. Per Rule 63.6, quote, in order to award a goal, the goalpost must have been displaced by the actions of a defending player. The attacking player must have an imminent scoring opportunity prior to the post being displaced, and it must be determined that the puck would have entered the net between the normal position of the goalposts. And since Giordano managed to shoot the puck, thus having an imminent scoring opportunity, the referees made the right call, awarding him the goal. What's even crazier is that this isn't even the first time a goal like this has been scored by the Leafs, as last season, Marner again was involved in a similar situation in a game against Boston.
There's the knockout by Bergeron that throws John Tavares into the net before the puck's there.
Finally, I managed to find a third recent example, also towards the end of last season, where in a game between Montreal and Chicago, Philipp Kurashev would score the overtime winner after Mike Hoffman crashed the net, dragging the puck across the goal line with him. So, according to NHL rules, a player can technically score a goal with the net being dislodged. If they can do that, what other weird things can they do? Well, how about refereeing their own game? During the 1983 season, in a game between the Whalers and Devils, Mickey Volkin and Gary Howitt did just that. The refs for that night's matchup got stuck in a snowstorm, which delayed them from getting to the game on time. And come pre-game warm-ups, only one linesman was available to officiate the game. When this happens, the NHL has a rule that states, quote, if through misadventure or sickness, the referees and linesmen are prevented from appearing, the league will make every attempt to find a suitable replacement. Otherwise, the managers or coaches of the two clubs shall agree on referees and linesmen. All of that basically means that if a replacement can't be found, that NHL players can actually put on the stripes and officiate their own games. Volkin and Howitt recalled their experience in an NHL.com article back in 2013. Volkin mentioned how he and Howitt were notified, while also bringing up a hilarious moment. While trying to line the teams up for a face-off, he realized Ron Francis was trying to gain an edge, and it was so blatant that he threw his own teammate out of the face-off circle. Although their brief stints as NHL referees only lasted one period, it was historic nonetheless, and is to this day the only time in NHL history where the players had to officiate their own game. Last week's game between the Leafs and Devils made headlines after the referees called back 3 Devils goals, snapping the team's 13-game winning streak. The fans in attendance didn't take too kindly to the calls, and as a result, they would throw tons of trash and debris out onto the ice while the game was still ongoing. And even though the fans were upset, they actually were extremely lucky, as there's a rule that can penalize a team if the fans get too disruptive. Throughout NHL history, we've seen numerous examples of that happening. For instance, remember this?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, hold those wristbands in your hands, show some class here. This is filming. This is not somewhere else in the NHL. So hold it, put them on your wrist where they're supposed to be, do not throw them on the ice. Have some class.
No! When Flyers fans threw wristbands out onto the ice in pure frustration, the Flyers would get a bench minor for delay a game. This all transpired after Pierre-Edouard Bellemare was ejected for a hit on Dmitry Orlov. But perhaps the most memorable example comes from a celebratory tradition from 1996.
Here comes Huberdeau moving in! Huberdeau makes the move and he scores! What a goal by Jonathan Huberdeau! And on Rat Night at the BB&T Center, the Rats come raining down on the ice.
During the Florida Panthers' magical playoff run, fans would cover the ice in plastic rats every time a goal was scored. The name Rat Trick was created by John Van Beesbrook after Scott Mellenby whacked a rat with his stick, then proceeded to score 2 goals with that exact stick. But because of the thousands of rats covering the ice after every single goal, it caused massive delays for both the games and even the broadcasts. The rat trick is actually the reason why this rule exists, because after the 1996 Stanley Cup Final, the NHL would create the rule that allowed the home team to get penalized if their fans threw any objects out onto the ice. This next rule sounds complicated, but is crazy to watch unfold. It's a regular season rule that essentially states that goaltenders can hop in and out of play at any time, and even change out on the fly. Let me explain. In a previous video, we talked about a rule that prevents goaltenders from re-entering the game if pulled for an extra attacker in overtime. But this rule allows for some crazy loopholes. Ilya Brzgalov was once seen coming off the bench to re-enter play while the puck was still alive. But perhaps the craziest example of this comes from the 1992 Pittsburgh Penguins. To preserve their goaltenders for the upcoming playoffs, they had their starting goaltender leave the ice and get swapped out for their backup every 5 minutes while the puck was still in play. I was able to find footage of this happening, and it looks as crazy as it sounds.
Messier, and Tony Amonte. Turcotte out with them. Amonte trying to center, couldn't do it. He was checked. Shell Samuelson moved the puck ahead, and here's Joe Mullen leading a 3-on-2 Penguin rush. Splits to defense, heads for the goal, passes it off for Stevens, and he couldn't get a shot away. Back comes Messier. The goaltenders have just changed on the fly. Wendell Young is in the net. Centering pass, and he stopped it. That's unbelievable. I knew he'd try to do it sooner or later.
Although it hasn't been done in a long while, you can change out your goaltenders on the fly while the puck is still alive. This final rule is completely bizarre, but is actually in the rulebook. NHL players and coaches argue the referee's calls all the time, and it's normally just dealt with and everyone moves on. But if the refs really wanted to, Rule 39.2 states that they can call a minor penalty against, quote, any player who challenges or disputes the ruling of an official, with no exceptions. Meaning players can get 2 minutes for unsportsmanlike conduct every time they dispute a call. Roll your eyes, penalty. Shake your head, penalty. So the question now is, has this ever happened before? And I think I found an example. Back in 2017, Sidney Crosby would take a penalty that he obviously didn't agree with, but he took his frustration to a whole nother level, going as far as leaving the box to let the referee know what was on his mind. And, well, the ref retaliated with some thoughts of his own, giving Crosby a 10-minute misconduct call, which ultimately changed the outcome of the game, as Pittsburgh would lose the game 7-1, while Crosby had to sit and watch from the box as his team faced the consequences of his own actions.
And this is what happened right after he came out of the box. He got right in the referee's face, and he obviously didn't shut it off, and a few choice words, and that's it.